Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Lisa Chow of the Maison Française of NYU. And on behalf of Maison Française, along with the director, Francine Goldenhar, we're very happy to have you here for this conversation, Blurring Borders, Reimagining Strangers, a fantastic conversation with these international authors. This event is part of the Penn World Voices Festival, which was founded in 2005. The theme this year is Resist and Reimagine. Every year since the festival has started, La Maison Française has collaborated with other international houses and departments at NYU to put on the Literary Mews, a collection of events that's taking place here at the Deutsches house across the street and at the Lillian Vernon Creative Writers House. As you saw outside, the community of literary and magazine presses is also holding its press fest outside, which I hope you got to enjoy on the way in. So we'd like to thank our collaborators at the Deutsches House, the Institute of African American Affairs, Casa Italiana, Creative Writing Program, and Creative Writing Program in Spanish. You can find out about upcoming events at the Maison Française on our print calendar, which is in the lobby, or on our website, and we're also on social media, so feel free to tag us. And most of our events are free and open to the public and are made possible by the support from our community. So I'm going to introduce our moderator, Rebecca Falkoff. She's an assistant professor of Italian studies at NYU. She's published essays on Elena Ferrante, Carlo Emilio Gadda, and Giorgio Manganelli, and is currently completing a manuscript on hoarding. So now I'll leave it to Rebecca to introduce the authors that will share their stories with you tonight.
Thank you. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you all for coming here this freezing cold Friday evening in the spring, strangely. I'll introduce our writers. Sitting to my left is, well, everybody's sitting to my left, but directly to my left and to your right, I suppose, well, depending on where you're sitting. Anyway, this is Raquel Abend. She's a Venezuelan writer and an alumna of New York University's Creative Writing and Spanish Master of Fine Arts program. She's published 3 volumes of poetry, 2 novels, and 2 edited volumes in Spanish. Her second novel, Cuarto Azul, tells of migration and uprooting, of symbolic and very real violence. She teaches at the Borough of Manhattan Community College and will be starting a PhD in creative writing in Spanish at the University of Houston in the fall. And next to Raquel is Ibi Zoboi, who was born in Haiti and immigrated to New York with her mother when she was 4 years old. And she describes that as a time when everything about her new home was strange and magical. She holds a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing for children and young adults from Vermont College of Fine Arts. Her debut young adult novel is American Street. It was a National Book Award finalist and a New York Times notable book of 2017. Her second young adult novel, Pride, is due out in the fall of 2018. And Nègar Djavadi was born in Iran to a family of intellectuals and dissidents when she was 11. When she... Okay, I need to shake up here. It's so weird that you were born at 11. I don't even get it.
Maybe she was.
Yeah, that's an interesting border to cross. When she was 11, she crossed the Kurdistan Mountains on horseback with her mother and sister to move to France, where she still lives. She's worked extensively in visual media, writing and directing several award-winning short films and co-writing the television series The Tiger Lily. Disoriental is her first novel. It was published in French in 2016, and it's just been released on April 17th in an English translation by Tina Cover that's published with Europa Editions. The novel was awarded the Style Prize by Le Prix du Roman News, and was named the best debut novel of 2016 by Lear. And it won the Porte d'Oreille Prize. And Ellen Sauchuk will be translating for Nègar. So please join me in welcoming the So each of you has written about crossing national borders, and some of you also write in a second language. So I wanted to start by asking each of you to speak about how you see strangers in your work, and whether that means in the sort of Romance language sense of foreigner, of being a foreigner in a country or a language, or in any other sense. And so I was just going to kind of ask each one of you, and Raquel, I don't read Spanish, so I'm not as familiar with your narrative work, but I know that in the Blue Room, you write about migrations. And I was also struck on the powerful meditation of the meaning of stranger in your poem, I Know So Little About My Analyst. So that seemed like a different way of thinking about strangers in space, and I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about that and about your work in the Blue Room.
Yeah, okay. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. First, you talked first about Blue Room, Cuarto Azul, so that novel is, first, everything began when I started questioning myself about how my father, who is Polish, arrived to Venezuela. So I started interviewing him like for 6 months, you know, all the travel they had to do from Poland in the Second World War, and how they arrived to Venezuela. And after I did a lot of interviews, I wrote this chronicle. And years later, I felt that I needed to put something of myself in this chronicle, but you know, I didn't exist in that time, so I had to fictionalize that story. So I created a new character, and the character receives a letter 50 years later of leaving Poland. She moved to New York, to the United States. She received this letter from a lover she had in the post-war in Germany, saying, "Please meet with me in the Blue Room." So she has to come back to Poland, and she was a Jewish girl. But what I did, right, another way of being a foreigner was that she, from being a Jewish girl, she converts herself into a nun. And that religious translation, that was a way of making the character find her way to root herself to a new ground. Because there's a moment in the book when she describes how she started talking again through singing religious chants, because she didn't understand anything about New York. But she began going to Mass, not because she believed in God as Catholics do, but because she needed to sing. So that's, you know, that's a little bit how the book goes. And I wanted to talk about migration in a point that you lose everything about yourself. So Fianka Kieslowski, the character, she loses so much in the war and after the war that she needed to reborn herself. Just like you had this lapsus, she was born at 11. I believe you born many times in your life because you construct yourself. You know, you are a construction of yourself when you're an immigrant. I had to build myself again when I came from Venezuela, and that's what I did also with my character. And about the poem about my analyst, yeah, it begins, "I know so little about my analyst," and then at least I know he has a cat, you know. And it's, you know, I actually have a short story that is about, and actually I talked about that yesterday in Lila's class at NYU. It's a story about this guy who starts going to therapy to practice English because, because you know, if you're going to the university, there's medical, how do you say that?
Terminology.
Insurance, right? You have medical insurance, so the therapy is for free, and it's more easy to practice English in therapy than to pay for classes. So, so I kind of start doing that. I mean, I like analysis, I like psychoanalysis, but doing analysis in English was really the door that opened English for me, that language, because before that, I wasn't able to speak so much. So I started doing analysis, and once you start talking about yourself in another language, you know, it's so weird to say things that are inside you, and then it comes back to your ear in another language. You know, it's a different process, and it I don't know, it takes your mind to different dimensions, and it opens up to you so many things. You know, it was like you know, a very hard and rude way of open up to a different culture. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And Evie, I wanted to ask you as well about the meaning of stranger in your work. In American Street, the narrator arrives in New York, and then her mother immediately gets detained, and so she then arrives at her relatives in Detroit without her mother, and is really uprooted, and people don't seem to understand her. The people who might understand her ask her, or who understand Creole, are asking her to speak only in English. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the meaning of stranger in that kind of context in the novel, and for you more broadly.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you for that question. I was listening to you and thinking about it as well. To me, I'm realizing that I feel like I'm writing about the strangers or the others within a Western concept or within the American concept. I'm a Haitian immigrant. I came here when I was 4. My character in American Street comes here when she's 16, so the process is very different. So what I've noticed about myself as an immigrant or a young immigrant coming here as 4, I always felt otherized in whatever setting I've been in. When I came here, I moved to a neighborhood. Any native New Yorkers here? I moved to Bushwick in the 1980s. You're nodding. If anybody remembers Bushwick in the 1980s, it was described as resembling Beirut, with dilapidated buildings, burnt out buildings, and for a number of reasons, New York City was at its knees at the time. And Bushwick was the neighborhood my mother, who was a single mother, could afford. And but we had a loving home. Within Bushwick were immigrant families, Puerto Rican, Dominican, and other Caribbean islands. You know, there'd be houses that were intact, of course, and we did not live in those dilapidated buildings, but there were loving families in homes, well-kept homes. There was one side of the block that was well-kept, and on the other side was, you know, a little broken, but the whole community was people of color, immigrants and African Americans in that neighborhood. And so within that context, within the larger context, the people in that neighborhood were otherized. And then I, as an immigrant, Haitian immigrant, felt otherized, mainly because I never quite fit into the fabric of my Bushwick community because I'm Francophone Caribbean. There's a huge difference between the Anglophone Caribbean countries, Jamaica, Trinidad, or what have you, and whatever history Haiti has. It's, you know, I've always felt Haiti is kind of isolated within the larger context of Caribbean culture, and then further isolated and otherized within the American context. So American Street is basically about this idea of coming from one broken country to another broken setting in America where we associate it with the American dream. So when I came here, Haiti, of course, in the media is described as the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and I put that in quotes. It's not that it's untrue, but there's a reason for that. And what does it mean to come from the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere to one of the poorest, or if not the poorest, large city in America, which is Detroit? As we know, Detroit has been bankrupt. And at the time when I came in, New York City was one of the poor major cities in America. And what sort of opportunities do you find within that sort of, within that trajectory? So I'm going back to this idea of strangeness. My character holds on to her strangeness, and strangeness for me is tradition, the things that we bring across the borders with us. I remember you said a character was singing spiritual songs or got very religious. My character is also very religious, and she holds on to her Vodou tradition, not Hollywood version, not VOODOO, but the tradition that is practiced by many Haitian people in Haiti and in the diaspora. So she comes with her lois, which are essentially the deities or the saints. And on the corner of American Street and Joy Road, and that is a real intersection in Detroit, is an old man that the neighborhood people call Bad Leg. And the myth is that he doesn't seem to be able to die. And he stands there with a bad leg and a cane singing riddles from time to time. So the neighborhood people see him as a homeless man. But my character, Fabiola, who comes with her very own worldview, and I'm kind of exaggerating for story's sake to kind of ask the questions, what if we do come with our own views and it shifts our perspective? So while everybody in this American city sees this man, American neighborhood sees this man as a homeless and disposable, she sees him as a deity and a loi. And Papa Legba figure is in American South tradition, the devil at the crossroads, but it's not really the devil, it's just a messenger or an intermediary, psychopomp, somebody who stands between life and death. And to her, she sees the divine in everything that is kind of mundane in this neighborhood. So he ends up helping her throughout the crossroads in the story. So that is my idea of taking what others consider strange or some things that's been demonized in American popular media, things about my culture that's been bastardized, the strange things, the demonic things, the things that, what's that guy, when the earthquake happened, there was this preacher who said Haitians made a deal with the devil or what have you, which is untrue, just to let you know. Our tradition that's been passed down from, slavery from West Africa across the Atlantic that we held on to, in spite of it all, what others consider strange and otherworldly or what have you, the things that we hold on to, I make sure that I put it into the story and elevate it, and just, not use it as like a plot device, but make sure that it's something that my characters can hold on to help them move throughout the course of the story. So strangeness for me, from other cultures, from immigrants, is the things that are divine, things that are essential, things that keep us alive, and things that we use for our personal survival.
Nègar, in your work, the reader is interpolated in the first paragraph as someone who is not from Iran, and someone who is them to the narrator's father, but you to the narrator, Kimya. But it's also about the experience at times of feeling like a stranger within settings like an alienating waiting room where she finds herself alone and surrounded by couples. And so again, it's a situation where a particular institutional setting within a strange nation, or the reader could be a stranger. So I was wondering about the meaning of the stranger in various ways.
Alors oui, je suis née à 11 ans aussi, c'est vrai, parce que
I was born at age 11 also.
je vous rassure, c'était pas une blague.
Not a joke. It's not a joke.
C'était un peu vrai ce que vous avez dit. Écoutez, pour moi, en fait, moi, mon expérience est différente puisque l'étranger, pour moi, est situé en Europe, c'est pas aux États-Unis. Donc, je ne sais pas trop comment ça se passe aux États-Unis, mais ce que moi j'ai ressenti en tant qu'étrangère en Europe, c'est le fait de faire partie d'une masse qu'on appelle étranger. Voilà. Et cette masse n'a pas de nationalité, c'est-à-dire c'est étranger. Et alors quel pays, on ne sait pas trop. Et pour peu qu'on soit un peu basanés, on est tous du côté de l'Orient quelque part. Alors ça se mélange, l'Afrique du Nord, voilà, arabe, persan, voilà, tout ça. Donc c'est cette appartenance à une masse non identifiée qui m'a toujours un peu dérangée. Voilà. Parce que ça va aussi avec le fait que l'Européen donne l'impression de tout savoir. Parce que colonisateur, parce que voyageant, les vacances, passons les vacances là-bas. Bref, on leur dit le Maroc, ah oui, je connais, j'ai passé 2 semaines. L'Iran, ah oui, je connais, j'ai passé 2 jours. Voilà. Donc, du coup, non seulement on est dans cette masse, mais on n'est pas interrogé non plus, puisqu'on connaît. Donc, on a la bouche fermée. Donc, pour moi, l'étranger, en fait, en plus, ça se double du fait qu'on vient quand même des cultures où l'individu n'existe pas vraiment. On fait partie d'une culture de masse, d'une famille. On n'est pas très individualisé en Orient. Et on fait partie de sa famille, de sa nation. L'individu n'existe pas. Et quand on est étranger dans cette masse, on n'existe pas non plus. On croyait pouvoir exister, mais on ne vous le permet pas. Donc c'était cette figure-là que j'avais envie d'émerger, en fait, de faire sortir de ce lot et de raconter son histoire, mais pas sur son histoire, sur 4 générations. Allez, allons-y tant qu'on y est, puisqu'il faut expliquer, essayons d'expliquer comment les choses arrivent, comment on devient un étranger déjà, et qu'est-ce qui nous pousse à le devenir. Et cette histoire qui est « je suis devenu étranger moi », ça vous regarde, puisque en effet, il ne s'agit pas de coloniser seulement. L'Occident et l'Orient, la politique, tout ça est mélangé. Donc, c'est votre histoire, la mienne, et votre histoire, en fait. Et c'était ça, vraiment, mon désir de raconter, c'est d'individualiser l'être et de lui donner une histoire, voilà, qui finalement se tisse avec l'histoire de l'Occident, puisque quand on regarde un pays comme l'Iran, chacun des événements qui ont bouleversé la vie de ce pays sont nés quelque part en Occident. Les coups d'État sont nés en Angleterre ou aux États-Unis. Khomeini a été accueilli en France. Voilà, donc je laisse Hélène traduire.
Can you hear me all right? First off, it is true for me. I was born at 11 years old, and it's not a joke. But for me on this panel, my experience has been a little bit different because unlike the two of you where you came here, and this was foreign for you, my experience was in Europe. So I don't really know quite how it happened, how everything progresses here in the US, but I'm going to be speaking from my own experience in Europe. And I think that when you are viewed as coming from elsewhere in Europe, how you're viewed as part of this gigantic mass of people who are just the strangers. And there's no individuality. You're not a stranger from here or from there, but it's a more generalized view of this is who the strangers are. And most of them come from the Orient, the East. And the East could be North Africa, it could be from any of the Arab countries, you could be Persian, but everyone is sort of lumped together in this one category as coming from the East. And it's an unidentified mass, which is large, but not individualized. And you have this group of this mass of the unidentified, And then you have the Europeans. And the Europeans, for many reasons, whether it's because of their history of colonization or the fact that many Europeans travel to a lot of different places, they never question the strangers about where they're from or what they do, because they think they know already, because they were the colonists, because they've, okay, you're from Morocco? Yes, I spent a week there a few years ago, or yes, so there's not even this extra step that's taken to question us, to find out who we are, where are we from, and how is our culture different, and how is our culture the same. And one aspect of our culture, the cultures in the East, is really that we come from a culture that doesn't glorify the individual. It's a culture where it's more the family and the country that are more important. So for us, basically, that is something that's very different, and we're not really permitted to be individuals in that kind of culture. So what I try to do in my book, and it's a story that goes back from the present to 4 generations in the past, is to try to show the reader, how did I become this stranger? What is behind me? What are the generations behind me? And how did this make me into a stranger in the first place? And also to show that whether you're from the East or whether you're from the West, there are many things that we have, many similarities that are operating and are interacting with each other, and that basically much of your story is the same as my story. And so by weaving together the Eastern and the Western and trying to convey that idea, I think it's very important. In my case, from Iran, most events in Iran are not events that were solely Iranian in origin. So for example, you have governments that are overthrown with British intervention, with US intervention. You have a coup d'etat, you have Khomeini coming, and there's US involvement. So all of this is part of an attempt to try to show how the stranger is not really that strange.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And maybe to go back to what you said about the glorification of the individual, because that's certainly something that comes up in the first chapters of American Street as well, where there's a sense that in reuniting with her family, the narrator is shocked at how her meals are all taken alone and how there's really this missing sense of community. And I wonder also how that can come through, or how that can be shown in a first-person singular narration. That is sort of how you make the story of yourself into a story of something about a cultural encounter, whether by going back in time or by traversing space, if that's something that you were, I don't know if that's a question.
Yeah.
But okay.
Oh, that's a comment. I can say that. To me, that was very intentional. I've been to Haiti, of course, and there is a communal sense. Me returning to Haiti as an adult, there was sort of a celebration for my return, and it wasn't something special. It's just something that people do. Somebody's arriving from this other place. There's a meal. There are neighbors, come and see this person. You got to call this person. Oh, you remember this aunt from when this person bathed you when you were a baby. So it's just, you feel supported and you feel that you are part of a collective, right? You are not an individual in that sense. And in speaking to the idea of immigration, I think in Haiti you send the individual abroad, but there is this sense that you're duty bound to the people that you left behind. And I see that through my mother. My mother has, my mother left in 1981. And she still, to this day, is sending money back. There's these, and even my in-laws send something, we call them doom, the big things. I don't know what you call it in English, but you'd send like containers, shipping containers, filled with stuff from the 99-cent store. And, just toiletries, personal hygiene stuff. You fill it up. and you send it back, and it's a huge business where I live in Flatbush, lots of Caribbean people. And that's the sense that you are an individual here as an immigrant, but you are still connected to the collective back home, and you have a duty, you know, some people feel they have a duty to help support them back home. Mhm.
And did you see that as, I mean, you've already spoken a little about going to a more extensive set of family roots, but did you see the crossing space and time as part of or telling the narrator's story? Well, I guess you've already sort of answered it, but never mind. I guess that's not really a question. Okay. So I also wondered, and this has come up a little, but whether you see part of what you're doing as writers, writing about a cultural encounter as sort of challenging stereotypes about your native countries, or whether that's something you're thinking about as you're writing, if you're writing for an audience in another language, if you think about that kind of perception and how you might combat stereotypes of your nation. So that's something that comes up for you, Raquel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking like 10 different answers at the same time, because I could answer that in different ways. But let me see. Because I write in Spanish, even though I live in the United States, in New York, there's an Hispanic literature world in New York, right? And I belong there, because the literary world in English is so different. It's another world, and I don't know why they don't relate more. Actually, I've never understood that. But writing in Spanish and me being Venezuelan, and the situation in Venezuela is really difficult. I cannot go back, for example, because I don't have a passport. The government in Venezuela doesn't want us to have passports. So I'm in a kind of a floating situation, because it's like I cannot like belong completely in any of these worlds, right? Mm-hmm. So I write in Spanish, but in New York, my books cannot be read in Venezuela because it's not working. The publishing business, it's really difficult to sell books in Venezuela, because one book that you sell here is the salary of a teacher a whole year. You know, the conversion of the dollar to the bolivar it's crazy. So when I write, I try to erase and fight stereotypes that we have inside Venezuela and that we have as Hispanics in New York. It's two different things, but I try to fight all of them at the same time. For example, in Venezuela, most writers, like the tradition of literature in Venezuela, novels are more about historic novels. You know, it's more about the colonial times and that kind of thing. For a long time, that was the kind of literature we had. And now the more recent literature, let's say for the past 5 years, everything is about immigration and politics. And everything is about the violence that we're living in Venezuela, because I don't know if you're aware of the situation, but it's very insecure to be there. You can get killed at any moment, kidnapped, you know, you get robbed 10 times a day. So all the poets of my generation are writing about that, about violence and about having to leave our country. And so the first novel I wrote, I began writing, I began to write it in Venezuela. It's about, it's actually science fiction. And this guy enters to this hotel that is like a kind of Olympus. And there's all kinds of people. all kinds of people with all kinds of language. And one of the first things I thought is every time that we read a book translated from another language to Spanish, most of them, the translators are from Spain, right? All the translations in Spanish that we have from Russian writers, American writers, everything that I read when I was a child was with Spanish, old Spanish translation, and it was so difficult for me to like literature with that kind of translation, because it was so far from myself, from what I wanted. So that was one of the stereotypes I fight, because my character speaks in a very colloquial Venezuelan way, and I wanted to do that. You know, he tells. How do you say bad words like fuck? How do you swear? So I wanted him to swear like a Venezuelan guy, and not like jolines, you know, like they do in Spain. I wanted him to swear like a Venezuelan guy and to feel like a Venezuelan guy, and I thought that on purpose. When somebody, at any time, when somebody appears and tells me, I want to translate this to English, I want to see how that language game is going to happen. I'm very interested in you know, learning how is that going to happen. That's one of the answers I have, but yeah.
That's so interesting. So it's as though you're writing in a native language, but in a different country, or in a different community of that native language, and maybe for a country that you knew that doesn't quite exist as you knew it, or I mean for a community outside. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and now we have more Venezuelans here because of the situation. But when I got to New York, most of my friends and the other students in the masters were from Argentina, Chile, Peru, Mexico, and it's really amazing how we all spoke Spanish, but there were so many words that we didn't understand, you know, and so many confusion, you know. For example, for us, taza, it's a cup, but in Colombia, that's toilet. So we had a lot of, you know, it was really amazing how inside the Hispanic world there's so many layers.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. I'm more familiar with that in the Italian context, obviously.
Right.
And Spanish language, but yeah. And do you see yourself as sort of combating stereotypes through your writing, or speaking to an American or non-Haitian audience in order to change the way that people think about Haiti?
No. American Street has, it's set on the gritty west side of Detroit, and it features teens dealing with criminality, not necessarily drug use, drug selling, and gun violence, and this is a reality. And I have to quote Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who says, the thing about stereotypes is not that they're untrue, it's that they're incomplete. So within that context, American Street is not my only novel. So I'm writing about love, I'm writing about joy, in different settings and in different contexts. At the same time, within American Street, I made sure to give every character some sort of voice, and to say that the violence, the choices that our young people make are part of a larger problem, part of a larger fundamental dearth, you know, in their environment. So in somewhere like Detroit, where there are no jobs, there's a high unemployment rate. We know about Motor City losing all the car factory jobs and it being bankrupt, the city not having money to pay teachers. What do young people do to survive? What do people do in general to survive? And what I know for sure in a city like Detroit, there's a lot of money that's unaccounted for. So within that context, it is telling a certain kind of truth. But if there are 10 other books that tell this sort of truth, then I think then it becomes a stereotype because we don't see the balance of the lives of people in these situations. Like I said, I spent my childhood in Bushwick, but I didn't come from a broken home, even though there were broken homes and dysfunctional families all around me. That was not the truth for everyone. So in that sense, when I do school visits, this is a young adult novel, when I meet, the youngest group I meet with is 8th graders, and I tell my immigrant story, which is different from my character's immigrant story. My mother didn't leave because of, poverty. My mother was a radio journalist, a broadcast journalist, a mouthy, opinionated broadcast journalist under a dictatorship. So that's usually not the narrative we hear about Haiti or Haitians leaving. So in that context, I show a certain truth, but I make sure that I balance it out.
And Nègar, did you have anything you might want to add about about whether you see yourself as educating a non-Iranian audience or readership? I'm thinking in particular about a footnote, which is sort of a curious thing, but also sometimes a delightful thing. In this case, I think a delightful thing to have towards the very beginning of the novel. You have a note explaining the region that the narrator is from in order to not have the reader go search Wikipedia. So it's a very clear educational project. The reader is not Iranian and doesn't really know anything about Iran, but you're sort of giving a different story that's clearly not the Wikipedia entry. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the novel, whether the novel educates or the didactic understanding that is presented within the text, if that's.
En fait, c'est vrai que j'ai écrit ces notes Wikipédia pour expliquer un peu l'Iran. Moi, je n'ai pas... la langue française est ma langue d'écriture parce que j'ai quitté l'Iran, j'étais enfant. Et donc je ne pense pas et je n'écris pas du tout en persan. En revanche, ce que je sais, c'est que j'ai appris la manière de raconter des histoires en persan. Et je pense que ça influence énormément la manière dont je raconte des histoires. J'écris, moi, pour le cinéma, je suis scénariste. Donc même, je vois avec mes camarades scénaristes, j'ai une petite différence, c'est que moi, quand je raconte, je commence toujours par le personnage. Et c'est comme ça qu'on fait en Orient, on commence toujours par dire le personnage, il est ci, il est ça, il est aveugle, il n'a pas de bras, voilà, donc il lui arrive ça. Parce qu'il est comme ça qu'il lui arrive ça. Alors, en France, je ne sais pas si en Europe c'est comme ça, en France, on commence toujours par une situation. On dit, un homme a gagné au loto, donc, mais qui est cet homme? Ça vient après. Donc, j'ai cette façon de raconter les histoires, je pense, qui vient de là, de la manière dont j'ai appris quand j'étais enfant ou quand on m'a raconté des histoires. Et donc dans le livre, je le raconte comme ça, je raconte l'histoire de Kimia et de toute sa famille en mettant en avant absolument les personnages. Vous voulez traduire?
Bien sûr. I think one of the things that I want to point out is that I left Iran when I was still pretty young, and I began studying French when I was in Iran. So French has always been my language for writing. It's been also, but it's not, I don't write in Persian, but the way I think about the characters was formed in a way that's very Persian. So it's making the jump between the way I see things and the way I write things. And I'm also a scriptwriter for cinema. And because of that, that may also have an influence, is I tend to see the character first and then try to create the story around the character. And this is something that's really very characteristic of the way Persians think, which is, you can have a guy, he's blind, he's got no arms, he's there on the street. What is it about him? And then what happens? Whereas a European writer might take a different approach, focusing on the situation a guy wins the lottery, then what happens? But what do we know about this guy who's just won? We haven't heard anything about him because the character hasn't been built up. It's the situation that's been built up.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I wonder if, this is a different topic because I want to make sure that we can give the audience some time to ask questions. So maybe just to conclude, and then we can let everyone ask questions if they have questions. Is literature a space where borders can and must be blurred, and where strangers can be reimagined, as the title would suggest? And is that, I mean, I suppose it's a yes or no question, but also is that something you see yourself as doing in your work?
Oh.
And how?
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, a border can be so many things. Border, right?
Yeah.
Border,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm thinking, for example, about genres, literature genres inside of one book, for example. You know, because that I'm interested in blurring those borders, for example, in between poetry, fiction, essays, you know. And for example, Blue Room in Cuarto Azul, it's a short novel, but it ends as a script for a theater play, and I was interested in blurring the border between fiction and theater, but at the same time, I put them there because borders are also important, and I needed this script to remind us that the characters don't exist. That I wanted to use that border to remind that the war happened, all these people were killed, and now it's just a book. You know, for me that was very hard because I was writing a personal story about my family, and even though the first character was fiction, and it was true, you know, it was true, but at the ending, this character steps into a stage, and it begins to act. You know, she becomes a character. So it's interesting to blur borders, but they exist also because they mean something. And in this case, genre, I'm interested in what it means. Why do we choose to write poetry and not fiction, or why this story has to be short and not that long, you know? But that's one of the things I'm thinking. Yeah.
Interesting. Evie, do you want to add anything on to blurring borders, reimagining?
Well, the one thing I want to add is that is what I do in my first novel and what I'm doing in my next novel. I really care and I'm interested in tradition and worldview, cosmology, people's cosmologies. And my next novel is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice set in Bushwick. And it features two black kids falling in love or hating each other at first, you know the story. And gentrified Bushwick is the backdrop. But in that, you get the Darcys are rich. Okay. But in that story is I can't erase the Puerto Rican and Dominican community that lived in Bushwick or that still lives in Bushwick now. And I have to bring the details of their personal lives or their traditions to the story. So in my story is a landlady, madrina, who means godmother, who's lived there all her life, or she was all, you know, but she's from Puerto Rico, and she brings Santeria, her tradition there. And in the basement is where she has her bembes, her ceremonies. And that's because when I was in Bushwick, I had neighbors who had chickens in their yards. and it wasn't chickens for eating, it was chickens for ceremonial sacrifices, the occasional goat. I vaguely remember that, and drumming and singing and the incense and the smell of sage, that was part of my neighborhood. So in that sense, if I'm writing about immigrant communities, I have to really, really focus in on the details of the traditions that they bring with them and that they keep with them here.
Nègar? Or blurring boundaries or borders.
La littérature, moi je le vois comme un lieu de sans aucune frontière du tout. Autant peut-être parce qu'aussi j'écris, mais pour un autre média que la littérature, où là il y a énormément de frontières. Et que ça soit parce que des spectateurs regardent comment on raconte une histoire, tout est très très codifié quand on écrit un scénario. Et alors que la littérature, pour moi, c'est vraiment la porte ouverte à une liberté telle qu'il n'y aurait plus de frontières, en fait. Et justement, mon interrogation vient souvent de ma peur, de ma propre peur, en fait. Ma limite serait ça et ma frontière, ça. Et c'est cette frontière-là qu'il faut dépasser, c'est-à-dire il faut toujours arriver à cette corde-là sur laquelle on tient debout en tant qu'auteur, où on ose aller jusque-là, ne pas tomber d'un côté, ne pas tomber de l'autre, et trouver cette frontière, mais en tant qu'auteur, plus qu'en tant que personnage ou histoire, et oser aller jusque-là.
For me, literature is really a place that has no borders at all. And this may be because I also write for other media. So, for example, when you're writing a screenplay, it's a much more codified form of writing. There are much more restrictions. How is the viewer going to be viewing the characters? So for me, when I focus on a more literary work, it's really like opening the door to a kind of freedom without any borders. So for me, that's very important. And I think for me, another border also can sometimes be my own fears, my own looking ahead to see what are my own limits, my own personal borders, and how in writing I can come to the point and go to the limit of what that is without digressing from one side to the other, and to try to focus on that as a way of finding a liberty.
Well, let's conclude by giving a round of applause to the speakers. And I wonder if you would be willing to accept questions from the audience if we have time. Yeah.
Just hoping you could each read a little from your work.
What did you
Board,
say?
read a little from the work.
Oh.
Let's see.
If you,
Ready?
yes. If you want to.
Au début, parce qu'il y a tellement de personnages qu'après.
Anybody want to start?
If you would like me, because
Okay. Or,
Nègar says it's better if I do it.
okay. Although I think maybe we should see if there. Well, sure. But it would be good to hear some of your work, probably. So maybe just a short passage. Yeah.
Juste là?
Oui, oui, juste.
Okay. Juste là? Okay. It begins with a chapter titled The Escalator. In Paris, my father, Darius Sadr, never took the escalator. The first time I went down into a metro station with him, on April 21st, 1981, I asked him why. His answer was, escalators are for them. By them, he meant you, obviously. You, the ones who were going to work on that Tuesday morning in April. You, the citizens of this country with your income taxes and compulsory deductions and council taxes, but also your education, your intransigence, your critical minds, and your spirit of solidarity and pride and culture and patriotism, your devotion to the Republic and democracy, you who toiled for centuries to achieve these mechanical staircases installed meters underground. At the age of 10, I wasn't conscious of all these ideas, but that helpless look on my father's face, acquired during the months he'd spent alone in this city, and which I had never seen on him before, shook me so much that even today, every time I see an escalator, I think of him. I hear the thumps of his feet on the hard treads of the staircase. I see his body hunched slightly forward from the effort, obstinate and resolute, unshakable in his refusal to take advantage of the momentary comfort of a mechanical ascent. According to Darius Sato's logic, that kind of luxury was a sort of abuse, if not outright theft. His destiny was henceforth joined to the staircases of the world, to the passage of time without surprises and the indifferent gazes of passers-by.
As I said, I tell the story of each character, and in American Street, the house is a character. And I didn't want the history of violence to be with the black kids that I write about, but going way back to the 1920s with some of the first inhabitants of Detroit. The story of 8800 American Street. There was work here in Detroit, cars, houses, factories, highways. Here was the American dream built brick by brick, screw by screw, concrete over dirt. So Adrian Weiss and his wife, Ruth, moved into 8800 American Street in July 1924, after that long journey from Poland and Ellis Island and the tenements of New York City. He'd been working in the Ford River Rouge complex for the last 5 years when Ruth gave birth to their first child in the middle of a snowstorm. Adrian came home 2 days later, drunk, smelly, bruised, and without a job because Henry Ford had zero tolerance for drunkards and their bathtub gin. So why not gin? Adrian loved it just as much as he loved the Model T, and there was more money with the Purple Gang and its bootlegging.
Well, like I said, my work has not been translated yet, but I did this translation myself of a couple of poems, so I'll just read one. I know so little about my analyst, that he has a cat, for example. He confessed that detail when I was crying for mine, that time of my life when I had to get rid of everything. Years passed by. Then I learned that he published a book. I knew about that when he gave me one copy, after asking me permission to be unorthodox. With all my admiration, J.R. That time of my life when it still affected me to be a writer without readers. Hours passed by. Then I learned that he was the son of someone, naturally, and that this person's name was Pamela, and that she had already died. For my mother, Pamela, in loving memory. Yet, I have not been able to read it.
Are there any, yeah?
This is a question for E.V. Zoboi.
Yes.
We know that Faulkner wrote between the two world wars. And finally, Haus said that when Faulkner train comes down the tracks, you better get off and get your own voice. Let me put this in a Haitian context. When the Edgewood Tonicot train comes roaring down, what do you do? How do you come up with your own voice that is not a Tonicot voice?
I'd hop on that train. No, seriously, I think Edwidge is writing, I always felt she's writing from a very Haitian voice. And like the Creole language, and I think, I guess French speakers here, there's so many metaphors on top of metaphors on top of metaphors. And I don't think Edwidge, of course, has her own voice, but at the same time, she's part of a long tradition of Haitian writers. And I'm pulling from that same tradition as well. And the thing is, she's taking that Haitianness and Creole and French and translating it for English readers. And I'm doing the same thing, and it may sound similar because we're coming from the same literary and I think from the same cultural tradition, basically. So it's the same train. I'm right there in it. I'll take a car in the back, but I honor her. I respect her voice so much, And I don't mind, I'm honored by any comparisons or what have you. So, yeah, I'm on that Edwidge Dancer Cat train.
Yeah.
If there's an element, so we're all speaking, so, I'll look at my question, not let me ask it. Sorry. Thank you. I thought a lot of you were talking about diaspora, and like writing for a diasporic audience. And I was wondering if I was just mishearing that, right? That like, Mrs. Zoboi specifically spoke about writing for America. As you're writing for the American audience that you're writing for, you're not writing for like immigrant kids who are moving here who are having that experience. And I would be interested to know if you're writing for people in particular, essentially, like as each of you. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. I think each book that I have wrote has a different audience in my mind when I write it, but in general, I think unconsciously, I'm always writing to the same people, and it's weird because these people, they're not anywhere right now, because everybody's immigrating from Venezuela. So I'm not sure even where they are right now. There's still some people there, but I think I'm always writing for people that are always moving. And I think that's what I love about New York. I feel like nobody is from here and everybody's from here somehow. Like, even though there are people that were born here, I feel like we're all from nowhere. And that makes me feel so good, you know. So I would say that I'm thinking always about people from nowhere. Yeah.
Can you say whether this is autobiographical or realistic, and whether this research about the 4 generations that you talked about, whether this is fictional or autobiographical? And I think I also want to just ask the same question: for whom are you writing? Is it for a different people? Is it a European audience, a French audience, an Iranian audience, or your family? And whether there is a sense of betrayal, let me just add another part. Is there feel there is a sense of betrayal at all in writing this story of your father, if it is autobiographical?
Ce n'est pas autobiographique. Je dirais que ça peut être dit comme biographique. Il y a des éléments biographiques dedans, mais c'est pas de l'autobiographie à proprement parler. C'est-à-dire que c'est pas mon histoire qui a été racontée telle que je l'aurais vécue. Les ancêtres, non, ça c'est inventé. Voilà. C'est d'autant plus inventé, je vais vous dire, que j'ai essayé en fait de créer, parce que je parlais d'un pays que peu de gens, enfin que tout le monde connaît, mais que personne ne connaît vraiment. Et donc, ce pays est assez compliqué, avec une histoire assez compliquée, une géographie assez compliquée. Donc j'ai essayé de faire en sorte, comment parler de l'histoire de ce pays à travers cette famille. J'ai essayé de faire en sorte que chacun des personnages, au fil du temps, ait un lien avec un événement important de ce pays. Donc, l'arrière-grand-père, c'est le moment de la révolution constitutionnelle de 1907, où, pour la première fois en Orient, un pays a eu un parlement. Donc, où il donne sa fille, parce que la situation est totalement chaotique dans ce pays à ce moment-là. La grand-mère atterrit dans la ville où le coup d'État va démarrer, le coup d'État de 1924, etc., etc. Donc, je peux vous faire le détail, mais je vais arrêter là. Donc, c'est d'autant plus autobiographique, enfin, d'autant moins, que j'ai essayé de faire ça. Voilà. Après, on arrive à la Révolution. J'ai vécu la Révolution dans une famille d'intellectuels, opposants politiques, de pères et de mères. Tout ça est vrai. Le cadre est vrai. Mais même là, je dirais, ma mère n'est pas arménienne d'origine, j'ai pas une grand-mère du tout arménienne, j'ai pas de sœurs, voilà. Donc, mais le cadre, c'est-à-dire être là en première ligne d'une révolution, c'est vrai. Et le départ d'Iran, c'est vrai. J'ai quitté l'Iran de cette manière-là. Mais après, j'ai pas eu des enfants de la manière dont Kimia va avoir ses enfants. Tout ça est faux. Mon père n'est pas mort, enfin, donc tout ça est faux. Voilà. Donc il y a un cadre qui est vrai. C'est la révolution.
My book is not really autobiographical, although there are autobiographical elements that are in it. It's not my own personal story. As for the ancestors in the book, they're completely fictional, completely invented. And what I wanted to do in the book really was to speak about a country that everybody thinks they know about, but nobody really knows about. And Iran is a country that's very complicated, both in terms of its history, its geography. And what I wanted to do was to take it from the personal level, the stories of these ancestors, and for each of the major characters to tie them to one particular important historic event that happened. So, for example, the great-grandfather, he's there in 1907 when the first parliament is established in Iran. The grandmother arrives in a city in 1924 when there's a coup d'etat. Fast forward to the revolution, that part, yes, I did experience it. I come from a family of intellectuals and people who were political activists. So in that sense, that is reflective of my own history. I was on the front line of the revolution, but the details of it are not my specific details. And then once the Kimia, the main character in the present time, arrives, I have not had children in the way she has children. If you read the book, you'll know that reference. My father hasn't died the way the father dies. And so there's a lot of it is fictionalized, but there are elements of it that are truthful, are autobiographical.
Yeah, il y avait d'autres questions aussi.
Oh, did you have another question that you want?
C'était pour qui j'écrivais.
Or who I write for?
And maybe one final question. Yeah.
I noticed two things. First, I just find it interesting how we're talking, I guess, about the elephant in the room, which is translation. It's basically translation of ideas, concepts, language in this whole room, but it hasn't really gotten delved into. But I also have another question that I want to ask. So I just threw that out there, comment that anybody can essentially respond to. But the other question that I have is if you could speak about your research processes in writing your works, because I know, for example, at least with American history, I did read like some interviews when I was reading the book, and I just found it interesting. I did on-site research in Detroit as well as the focus group, so that was just to start to have folks just talking about their research projects and constructing these pieces.
Nice. Overall question about research?
Yeah, just sharing more about your research.
So I
process.
wrote American Street without having been to Detroit.
Oh, I thought you did go to Detroit.
I did go to Detroit after I wrote American Street. Google Maps. There's a way you can drive down streets using Google Maps. So it was like, in draft form, trying to get what my saving grace was that I was writing it from the perspective of someone who's not from there. And talking to lots of people, watching a lot of videos, listening to Motown, getting the sense of this, what's known for its sound. But documentaries, there are so many documentaries on YouTube. My personal go-to favorites are these old CBS News reports, tapings. I mean, there used to be a huge thing, CBS News report, and they go back as far as the early 1960s. And for some reason, a lot of them like to focus on blacks in the ghetto. And one of the famous ones is the one that deals with farming. Migrant workers. I forgot the name of it, but it was a huge one that focused on migrant workers of all races down in Florida and, you know, the poverty that they're living in. But I love watching them to get a sense of how far we have not come.
Harvest of Shame?
Harvest of Shame, that's what it was, Belglades, and I actually went to was near Belglades just a couple of months ago, where there's a large Haitian population, interestingly enough. But documentaries I love, and getting a sense of feel of neighborhood, seeing the landscape with Google Maps, and listening to native Detroiters talk about their home.
For me also, I didn't go to Poland. I haven't go to Poland or Russia or Germany. Basically, the only place in the novel I know is New York, and it's not the New York I know because I wasn't here in the 80s. But I saw a lot of movies, and I read diaries from writers who did lead the war, and actually the most amazing thing was the music. I listened to the soundtrack of Kieslowski's movies. For example, Blue, Red, and White. That trilogy has an amazing soundtrack, and I would listen and listen and listen, and all the scenarios I built was from music. Also, I just realized the connection with my character and the music. Okay. Yeah.
Nègar, did you want to talk about your research process?
Oui, moi c'est à peu près la même chose puisque je retourne pas en Iran, donc et puis il y a des parties d'Iran dont je parle où j'ai jamais mis les pieds. J'étais qu'à Téhéran, donc je connais pas le reste. Enfin, je connais un peu le nord, mais cette ville dont je vous ai parlé où démarre le coup d'État, je l'ai jamais vue. Moi, j'ai regardé. En fait, j'avais des images. Comme c'est un livre sur la mémoire, j'ai essayé de rester sur la mémoire de ce que j'avais de ce pays. Et en revanche, je suis allée voir des événements, je suis allée voir les archives en fait télé aussi, des événements dont je parlais, par exemple le couronnement du Shah, ce genre de choses où j'étais pas née, donc j'avais pas d'image, et c'était très particulier aussi, donc c'était pour saisir l'ambiance de cette époque-là. Et puis j'ai lu un peu enfin, je connaissais parce que les Iraniens parlent énormément de leur histoire puisque tout est raté, donc ils passent leur temps à dire ah si ça s'était passé comme ça s'était passé comme ça, donc je connais tous les événements plus ou moins, mais bon, je suis allée voir un peu les détails dans les livres d'histoire.
Much like you, I really didn't do a whole lot of research about it. But for example, I speak about places in Iran where I've never set foot. I've never been. I was born in Tehran. I know Tehran well. I know some places in the north. But for example, the city where the coup d'etat takes place, I never set foot there, so I don't know. But because this is a book about memory and remembering, I really wanted to stay focused on that. But there were some things, for example, I did do some research and some archival research. For example, when the Shah had his coronation as emperor, I wasn't born yet when that happened, and so I really wanted to go back and find out what was the ambiance at the time, how were things possessed, and to learn a little bit more about history. But Iranians are always talking about their history because there have been so many things that have failed in their history, and they're always saying, well, if we had done this or we had done that. So there is a lot of that in it as well.